And now we have a talk from Chris from RotaGeek, who is going to share his story. So yeah, take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Give it a round of applause for Chris.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Firstly, thanks to James and Dina for organising the event and inviting me along. So I'm Chris, the co-founder of RotaGeek, and what I thought I would do is take you on a journey, I suppose, of why we sell to enterprise businesses. We received a lot of advice on our journey of not doing this, and I think it's often seen as potentially a risky strategy. And the way I was going to walk you through it was really to tell you, firstly, a little bit about what we do, to sort of put that in context, and then walk you through our journey and sort of intersperse with our learnings and how our approach to enterprise businesses changed, with a little bit of evidence kind of sprinkled through. How does that sound? So the first thing to tell you is that I started life as a doctor. So I spent 16 years working in the NHS, trained in emergency medicine. And so the move to startup life was kind of interesting. So I came from an environment where money wasn't a feature. So if you needed something, you got it. And if you didn't need it, you didn't get it. And I didn't need to worry about how much stuff cost. So in my head, I'm kind of writing a book. And it's either going to be entitled How We Made It or How We Nearly Made It. But the very first chapter is going to be called Listen to Everyone and Ignore Most of It. That move from I guess the very scientific-based world of medicine into startup life was very interesting, because we had lots of people telling us what we should and shouldn't do, and speaking with great authority. And it took me about a year to realise that we probably had to challenge some of that. So this was my first lesson. And to give that some medical context, here's a reference which identifies the neural pathway which allows you to ignore stuff. So yeah, I know it's kind of slightly breaking with convention to start a tech talk with a medical journal reference, but thought we'd be maverick. So to just talk you through briefly what we do at RotaGeek. So we allow very big organisations to solve complex scheduling problems. And in the main, that's around creating better staff schedules. So there are huge organisations out there with 10,000, 20,000 staff that organise their staff entirely on paper or spreadsheets. So we help them move onto a digital platform. So not technologically very interesting, but it solves loads of problems for the business. When they're on our platform, we can then start doing some clever stuff. So we can take data feeds of demand, staff preferences about when they want to work, and create optimum staff schedules. So this gives you a brief idea of what we do. This runs in retailers across the UK. So we can schedule particular hours of demand. We know where we want our staff from data feeds and some data science work. We know contracted hours for staff. We can be family friendly. We know when they want to work. We can schedule to budget, skill mix, create effective teams, work to the limits of the working time directive, and in just 2 clicks, we create a near optimum schedule in 5 seconds. So we take all this data and we allow their teams to make much better data-informed decisions, which is great for the business and great for staff, because we allow them to have much better control over their work-life balance. And as you would imagine, there's an app so staff can see who they're working with, really important. They can see their shifts, they can request leave and swaps. Real life gets in the way and you have to drop a work shift. They can pick that up. And our life started trying to solve that problem, and that problem came from the NHS. But we, I guess, increasingly saw that our clients, big businesses in the UK, would approach us and say, "We need you to solve scheduling." And we'd go, "Great, what do you mean?" And they'd say, "I don't know." So we've developed a kind of a process that we take them through, and that starts from knowing what a business demand is. So we do a whole load of data science work to take historic data and predict future demand. We take them through optimizing their scheduling and then optimizing their performance of the organization. So that's briefly what we do and why we do it. The last quarter, we've grown our customer base 5-fold. And so while that's quite exciting, it feels like we're at an inflection point, it also can be quite scary. And it feels a little bit like a space shuttle ride. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Chris Hadfield, which is, being in the space shuttle feels like a gorilla sitting on your chest and then throws you off a cliff, but it's quite exciting. And that's broadly how this year has felt for RotaGeek and the team. And this is where we started, was back in 2009. I was working in the Royal Free Hospital, and the thing they say about the Royal Free Hospital is when you're in it, the nice thing is you don't have to look at it. But I sort of had a history of trying to change the NHS, so we did a number of things. The NHS globally is a very efficient way of delivering healthcare, but when you're in it, there's clearly things that we can improve. So I set up little ventures within health. So we set up a not-for-profit training course for doctors. I helped organise what was until recently the biggest medical march in UK history. And then we're looking at solving a particular problem for doctors and around scheduling. And if you get that scheduling right, it's great for doctors, but it's also better for patients. So I teamed up with two folk who are now my co-founders, Nick Mann, who's our CTO, and Roy Pounder, who's our chairman. So this was way back in 2009, and we thought we can solve this by building cloud software. So there were three chaps trying to sell cloud software to the NHS in 2009. Not a terribly clever place to be. And we spent about 4 years learning how not to run a business. I was working full-time as an A&E doctor. Nick had a developer's job. Roy had another position. And so actually we were running this as a project and learned a lot of the problems that we heard about earlier on. So it'd be great, I love it, but if you could just develop this, it'd be even better, and we were interested. And we ended up building a massive product that nobody really wanted to use, and not really getting huge amounts of traction in the NHS. But then in 2013, we got lots of inbound inquiries from big businesses, which really wasn't what we were expecting. So a chain of hotels, a gym, a chain of veterinary practices. And we hit this point where we thought, well, we're not getting huge amounts of traction in the NHS. Perhaps we should pivot wasn't a word we knew then, move to selling to enterprise businesses. And we thought we should just bin everything. And everyone said, no, don't bin it, it'd be really bad. But we decided that was probably the best thing to do. So we totally scrapped everything. We took everything that we knew and rebuilt it from the ground up in 2013. And before we'd finished it, we sold it to our first 2 clients. Lotus Cupcakes was our second ever client. They're lovely and they're still with us. And 150 staff, and we moonwalked out of the meeting. We just sold 150 staff. And it was great. And then, does anyone know Peter Nixie? If you don't, and you want to take a photo of this and tweet Peter, it'll totally freak him out. So my second chapter is called I Blame Peter. So Pete's an ex-YC alum, he's co-founder of CopyIn, and he was my neighbour. And I was on a day off 2014, so picture this, I was on the day off from A&E, I was about to take my kids out, and Peter knocked on the door and said, I'm going to give a talk. And I want to interview you. And I said, but Pete, about what? And he said, about startups. But we haven't done anything. We've just made loads of mistakes. I went, amazing. So he interviewed me, and I'm really honest about all the things we did wrong. And I kind of said, but I think we're kind of in a good position now. We've sort of learned a whole load of stuff. And that was at Wayra. And Wayra's the Telefonica accelerator. And we were approached at the end, and they said, you should totally apply. The deadline's tonight. Can you get your application in? So we applied, not really thinking anything of it, and went through the selection process and got selected. So there I was, almost about to finish my training after 16 years in the NHS, and then accepted on a Wayra programme. So a very difficult conversation with my wife, which ultimately resulted in this, which is my last day as a doctor. And that kind of move to startup life was interesting because I felt like this for a year, which was an imposter. And kind of moving to an area where you've had huge credibility to not feeling like you've got a whole bunch of credibility. And second scientific reference, there's something called imposter syndrome. Does anyone know about it? Really important and great. It's really good if you feel it, is the evidence. So if you feel it, you're probably out of your comfort zone, which is probably a good thing, and you have self-awareness, which is probably also a good thing. So kind of if you feel that, don't be put off by it. So I felt that for about a year, just thinking, I have no idea what we're doing. So the very first day in Wayra, we pitched the O2 retail stores, having never pitched anything in my life. And so we sort of approached it in a medical way, as if you would turn up to an A&E department. How do we solve your problem? This is what we've got. It feels like it might be a good fit. And within 24 hours, we'd secured a trial, and we ran that trial for 2 months in 2014. And at the end of the trial, we did a whole load of iterations, 90 different iterations in 2 months. And at the end of the trial, they agreed to sign a contract. So we went from initial meeting to contract. Actually signing the contract was about 6 months. So that was great for us. So we moved from scheduling small businesses to scheduling O2. And we rolled out with them in January and February 2015. There were 4 people in the business when we rolled out with O2, with 270 stores and 2,500 staff. So we trained them all online, obviously to show how lean we were, but in fact, because we couldn't do it any other way. And it was really effective. So we had 99% of the stores fully using the system in 3 weeks on both phases. And within 6 months, we'd saved them £2.5 million, which is very entertaining and not at all what we expected. So now we're in this position that we've moved to selling to enterprise clients, and we were it was like crystal meth for startups. So we were like, this is amazing, I want more of this. And thought that this was definitely the way to go. We should sell to enterprise clients because we solve their business in a really compelling way. And it was a big sort of shift for the team. Part of the Wayra program is mentoring, and one of our mentors, I remember sitting in front of him, really kind of esteemed chap who had built a business, sold it and moved on, and he said, don't hunt whales, boys, it's dangerous. And so then you're being challenged, and with this imposter syndrome, you're thinking, wow, maybe we've got this all wrong. And lots of our other advisors were saying, you definitely, to build a huge business, you need to target smaller clients and the self-service model, that traditional SaaS model. And so, you might know some of these blogs, and if you don't, I've kind of created short links for you so you can go and find them. But the first one by Boris Firts is the only 2 ways to build a $100 million business. And broadly what he said was, you've either got a very compelling proposition with long lifetime value of your clients, and as long as that's hugely bigger than your customer acquisition cost, that's the way to go, or you go viral. And then someone else wrote a kind of an extension of that, which is 5 ways to build a $100 million business, and he broke it down into this chart. And at the top he had elephants, not whales, but to generate $100 million or pounds worth of revenue, you need 1,000 customers paying you £100,000 a year, or you need 10 million flies paying you £10 a year. And so it seemed to us like there were 2 very different propositions, but our advisors were telling us very confidently that this was the way to go. Let's go viral. And trying to make staff scheduling viral is kind of interesting. So we spent a year struggling with pirate metrics. I'm assuming you all know what pirate metrics are, but these Dave McCullough's talk about 5 things that all SaaS companies should do: acquire, activate, I can't remember now. Referrals, revenue, and something else. Retain. Is that right? Yeah. Something. Thank you. So we struggled with this for about 9 to 12 months, and what we learned was this. This is a graph of kind of scheduling complexity against company size, and small companies are really easy to schedule for. So I've got 10 people in a coffee shop. It's relatively straightforward. As we grow and we have, like, let's say 200, 500 staff, it's really tricky. So we come across people saying, oh no, it's amazing, I love what you do, but Barbara on a Thursday only works that. If Bob on a Tuesday in June works this, but in August it's completely different. And then as you get to big enterprise clients with thousands of staff, they've kind of inherently gone through that pain and simplified their system. So we found that it's easier to solve problems down here or up here, and actually in the middle is really challenging. And that's probably, if we're going to go the pure kind of self-service SaaS, that's where we'd want to play, and that was tricky. And if you look at that in a more structured way, so the scheduling complexity at the 2 ends is easier. The revenue we get as you go, I guess, to the right of the screen is much bigger. Onboarding sort of follows the same pattern. Actually, it's relatively straightforward to onboard big clients. One of the challenges is the sales cycle is obviously much longer for enterprise sales. And what we found is that we couldn't be Tesco's. So Tesco's do this really well. Tesco's Value and Tesco's Finest. And you're trying to offer a very cost-effective solution, but also a sort of premium solution. And what we found is people were being benchmarked to that cost-effective solution. So if you have a SaaS solution, £1, £2, £3 per user, when you then go and speak to your enterprise clients, they say, I've looked on your website, that's your pricing. And they're different propositions. And that's where we started to struggle. And so we looked again at why we should sell to enterprise clients, and we looked at our competitive landscape, and there's a whole load of people that do staff scheduling, and there's a massive cohort that do staff scheduling in that self-service space. And so what we were essentially being advised to do is go into this really competitive space where lots of people are doing scheduling. And actually what we identified is that enterprise clients don't have a great offering for just scheduling. They have big, massive, outdated enterprise solutions, but they don't have a targeted scheduling solution. So we thought there was kind of a blue ocean in there, and that's what we did. So we switched off our self-service offering and went whale hunting. And what that meant was that we had to build out a team, or kind of, I suppose, consolidate our team, because we always kind of focused there to totally refine our enterprise offering. And that affects how you sell and how you support and how you engage and how you manage your customer success. And so that's what we did over the, I guess, subsequent 6 to 9 months. And we developed a really nice way of engaging with clients, which is broadly entirely analogous to how you might rock up to an A&E department, surprise. So if you turn up to A&E with your hurty finger, first someone's going to talk to you and make sure you're in the right place. And that's what we do at our initial meeting, which is we're small and we deal with lots of big companies. And so there is like a first date thing where we say, so this is how we are and this is how you are, is there a good fit? And we sometimes say no at that stage and refer them on to the competitors. If we think that we're a good fit, we go to the discovery phase. So this is now you being interviewed by the doc. And we ask questions. So where does it hurt? How long has it been going on for? Any other things? Anything else in the business? And we do a really sort of detailed discovery phase. It takes about 2 to 4 hours. But at the end of that, we can deliver your diagnosis and we kind of say, well, listen, these look like your problems and we think there are solutions here. We can definitely solve these ones and we should refer you to our partner organizations who can solve these. And it sort of helps us, this approach that actually what we're doing is solving problems, not selling software. And it seems to work really well. So in terms of trying to make this useful to you, I guess my advice would be if you consider enterprise sales, if you've got a really compelling proposition that solves problems for enterprise clients, if you've got a self-service option, it's really difficult. You've either got to switch it off as we did, or in some way sort of brand it or disconnect it so they're not benchmarked at those 2 levels. You've got to make sure that you can either pivot your team or build out another team because the skills are totally different. And you've got to have revenues to support those longer sales cycles, and that can be the challenge. Final thing is obviously make sure the market's big enough. Some other really interesting considerations, you would need to deal with procurement, which is massively entertaining. It's like that really aggressive chap off The Apprentice when you go into those interviews. Your liability is different. So if someone doesn't turn up for a shift for a coffee shop, we've never had anyone not turn up for a shift because of RotaGeek. But what happens if it's in a big organisation or a mission critical organisation? So your liability can change. EU data regulations are really critical in data security for your enterprise clients. And sales becomes a really high touch process. But this is the other reason to it, is you get to take on massive competition. So rather than these 2 athletic chaps, it's a little bit like fighting someone that's kind of middle-aged, slightly bloated and slightly out of shape. And it's easy to I suppose, to beat up on the enterprise competition. They're in a really difficult place because they built huge businesses. Our poster competitor was bought out by venture capital for 2.4 billion in 2014. Every time we've seen them in a contract, we've beat them 5 times in the last year. And it's a bit of an unfair fight because we're much leaner, we're much faster, and are able to offer a much more customized approach. But it's such a thrill being able to see 20 people beat a company with 100,000 staff. So there's definitely one attraction for me of doing this. That's kind of our journey, and I suppose that if you're considering enterprise sales, I'm just going to offer you 3 bits of advice. The first is solve problems for clients. So imagine you got hit by a car or got shot and you rocked into A&E and I turned up and I was like, I've got a PhD and a medical degree, I'm amazing. You'd look at me and just go, I don't care, solve my problems, which is presumably what your enterprise clients think when you go into meetings. So this idea of, we've got some amazing features, I don't care, tell me what your problems are and then tell me how you're going to solve them. So that process really works for us and it helps us build credibility with really big organisations, and we've taken 2 deals away from competitors by that approach, which is I don't want to sell you stuff, I want to solve your problems. The second is that sometimes you find enterprise clients have been scarred by poor suppliers in the past, and they're a little bit like jilted lovers, and you've got to treat them very carefully because I guess suppliers have let them down in the past. So we had a client who toed and froed for 6 weeks on our service level agreements, to the point that I phoned them up and said, you can write anything in there, any sanction you like, we've never triggered them and we never will. And I think they've just been offered so much before and always let down. So one of the key things is always just be sensitive to that, because it slows the process down and can be frustrating, but there's a reason behind it. And then you always have to maintain your credibility and never let your clients down. And the third bit of advice is be prepared to walk away. It's really challenging when you're a small business and let's say you've got 2 or 3 big enterprise clients to walk away from a massive deal. Got time for a quick anecdote, which was we were meeting with one of the budget retailers, and it was totally like something out of The Apprentice. We had a great proposal and the head of procurement walked in, picked it up, threw it on the table and went, whatever it is, it's too much. And at that stage, I was pretty sure we weren't going to work with them. And when we left the meeting, he said, I'm going to stick this on my Facebook page. And I said, you should, nobody will see it. And so we didn't work with them. But the kind of serious bits behind that is, what works really well is when you've got a partnership with the organisation and actually they're comfortable with the fact that you're really small, but you have to build credibility by being really honest and show that you can solve their problems. And then you've got that partnership and you can do amazing stuff. If that organisation wants to leverage their position, it's not going to work and it's going to really harm your business because you'll lose a whole load of other opportunities. So that's what I had to say. But the final thing is thank you very much for listening. But remember the first advice, which is listen to everyone and ignore most of it.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was, who would have thought enterprise software could be entertaining, eh? Thank you so much.